The ACTU and many others have spoken to people who've come forward with their stories, and we just, in the light of talking to the marvellous Jill and Nev Barnard today, we just wanted to show you this story to highlight that fighting cancer is not free.
In 2015, I was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic prostate cancer. To have a diagnosis like that when you were 62, just on the cusp of retirement, is very, very hard to deal with. Most people think you just go to one doctor, you're oncologist. But in reality, there's a team that looks after you when you have this disease. All those specialists need scans to see where the disease has progressed to, if the treatment has been successful, and those scans, in my case, they were up to $700 each. Bill Shorten's plan to have these scans covered will help people when they need it most.
Oops, someone just lost it.
Well, welcome everyone to Burnie and to the Rural Clinical School here at the University of Tasmania, which is positioned just between the Northwest Regional Hospital and the Northwest Private Hospital. And I'd like to thank Lizzie Shires, the Director of the Clinical School, for having us today. Great privilege to meet Jill and Neville, Jill, Flo, Giovanna and Anne this morning, cancer patients and cancer survivors here from the Northwest of Tasmania, to listen to their stories. We hear these stories all the time, as you've seen in the video before. People paying far too much for their care, and Labor has a wonderful plan to help those people. But here in Tasmania, we have a health crisis. Now, before the 2016 election, you probably heard me talking about it then. The by-election last year, you heard me talking about it again. We've not heard the government talk about health in Tasmania as being in crisis at all. And I challenged my Liberal candidate for another debate. I've done 6 candidate debates in the last 2 weeks, and I'll challenge him again to talk about health, because it is a priority here in Tasmania. Too many Tasmanians are waiting far too long for their elective surgeries. I spoke to a gentleman who has, and this makes me quite emotional because these are the real stories of people in Tasmania waiting for care. This man, his name's Tom, 3 breaks in his hips, waiting for surgery. Tom has spoken about ending his life. He is in tears all the time. His wife is in despair all the time. He feels that there is no hope. We have to do better in Tasmania for people waiting for surgery, getting their cancer treatment. And the only way we can do that is to vote out this government on Saturday. We need a change. We need to do better. And I am very proud to be part of the Labor team under Bill Shorten, who's here with me today, Tanya Plibersek and Catherine King, to actually make that change a reality should people vote for me on Saturday and vote for Labor. People of Tasmania deserve better, and I'd like to welcome Bill here to Burnie. Thank you.
Thanks, Justine, and good morning, everybody. First of all, I just want to thank Jill and Nev Barnard, who I was speaking to upstairs, Jill and Anne and Giovanna, who shared their stories. Cancer makes you sick, but it shouldn't make you poor. We heard from Ron in that video information session then, that when you're in the fight of your life, it's not free. And cancer won't wait till you can get all the free stuff. You need help now. And that, to me, really sums up one of the big issues in this election. It is important that voters use this election to send a message to Mr Morrison that cuts to hospitals and healthcare hurt. And Tasmania, the effects are catastrophic. right around Australia, but particularly in Tasmania. The waiting lists, when they increase, people get sicker. People indeed drop out of trying to get on the waiting lists, and in some cases, people even die. Tasmania, the effect of the medical crisis is catastrophic. The longest waiting times for elective surgery, for emergency treatment. We've seen the number of people on the lists waiting to get to the head of the queue. We see them dropping out, and even worse. This election is about proper funding of healthcare. It's about a priority. A nation makes a decision in an election. We choose to better fund our healthcare system in Tasmania and everywhere, not provide tax loopholes for the already very well off. I'd like to invite Catherine King to talk further about our measures in healthcare.
Thanks, Phil, and it's terrific to be here again with Justine Kay and my colleague Tanya Plibersek here in Tasmania, where we know health is the number one issue. The Australian Medical Association says that elective surgery waiting times are the worst in 20 years, and they are right. Here in Tasmania, 9,000 people are waiting for elective surgery. 1 in 3 Tasmanians don't get elective surgery in time. And we know the real life consequences for that, because the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare statistics show that the number of people who are dying or who are uncontactable on elective surgery waiting lists has been increasing, more than 8,000 across the country. Now that is a damning indictment on the 6 years of the Liberal government, the Morrison government, and what they have done to Australia's healthcare system. It is a damning indictment that people are waiting too long for elective surgery, and that in some cases people are indeed dying. 1 in 10 people in Tasmania wait for over a year for common procedures like cataract surgery, and in the case that Justine has just talked about, for hip surgery, for knee replacement. And people aren't just waiting quietly at home, they are in desperate pain. It's why, frankly, the consequences of the Liberal government's over $700 million of cuts to public hospital, $2.8 billion if they're elected again at this election in a few days' time. There is really only one choice when it comes to fixing the crisis that's in our public hospitals, only one choice: to invest in health, and that is to vote Labor on May 18.
Mr. Shorten, your wages proposal is...
Hi everyone, good morning.
Mr. Shorten,
Andrew.
Thanks, Mr. Shorten. On Adani, you've said that Labor won't review or revoke approvals. The ABC's reported this morning that based on freedom of information requests, it's got advice from CSIRO advising the government that it couldn't give a categorical assurance that it complied with the groundwater management plan, didn't require couldn't give a category assurance, scientific problems. And also too, the decision was made in great haste. Does this give you grounds perhaps to review Adani if you get in office?
To be clear, I've said that Labor has no plans to review the decisions, but I do think we need to find this Environment Minister. I don't think she has given one national press conference. Something on Instagram is not actually answering questions, is it? I do think that the Minister for Environment, who the current Prime Minister has said he will make the Minister of Environment again if he wins the election, I do think she needs to come forward to deal with these matters and to explain and account for herself.
Mr. Shorten,
Hi, Eliza.
Hi. This wages proposal is designed to pressure the Fair Work Commission to increase wages by July. You're also intervening on penalty rates. Are you compromising the independence of the Commission? And what's the point of having an independent body if the government's going to override its decisions every 5 minutes?
Well, let's not confuse a government advocating and making a submission to increase wages with determining the outcome. Previously, historically, governments have put in submissions. But let's be clear. I have said today, Brendan O'Connor, my Shadow Minister, and I have written to the Fair Work Commission, and we have said that in the event we're elected next Saturday, one of our first acts will be to withdraw from the old government's meaningless, insipid, useless submission. Now, I accept that and I acknowledge it is a forward-leaning decision, an unprecedented decision for us to boldly put the case to the Commission that we should have modest but meaningful rises, fairer wage outcomes for millions of Australians. But it is unprecedented to live in a time where we have chronic wages stagnation, which is effectively eating into the household incomes of millions of Australian workers. Now, what we'll do is we will put a submission, we will prepare an argument, we'll present evidence, but we will do so through the agency of the Fair Work Commission. We would do so, and we would expect the Fair Work Commission to consult with business and industry, as we would. What we want to do is just get wages moving again, but we will take on board in our submission, even before Fair Work makes a decision, the arguments about business and industry's capacity to pay, staged implementation. See, what I'll be as Prime Minister is not a person who turns my back on millions of wage earners, but I'll do what I've always done. Be part of the solution, part of the negotiation through the agency of the Fair Work Commission. But one thing is for sure, we're not going to give up on trying to move wages, because it had been stagnant in Australia, and correspondingly we see 0% inflation, we see a loss of confidence, we see 1 million Australians working 2 jobs just to make ends meet, another 1 million Australians requiring more work, seeking more work, and we've got 4 million Australians, nearly 3.5 million, who are in insecure or part-time work. There is a problem in this country, and Labor won't turn its back, but we will do so in partnership and consultation with industry and business through the agency of the Fair Work Commission. Jono. Sorry, Jono, and then I'll come across.
Mr. Shorten, you mentioned a lot of numbers there. One number you haven't mentioned, though, is what you would like the wage to increase by. Sally McManus has said $50 a week. Do you support that view? And given the need to put a cost to the economy, what number, how much do you want wages to rise by?
Well, I've answered this question many times. That'll be up to the Fair Work Commission to determine. That will be up to the Fair Work Commission to determine. But I want to give John a slightly longer answer than that. But one number I can tell you I don't think's right is I don't think that an adult trying to make ends meet in a full-time job should be working for an hourly wage which doesn't take them out of poverty.
You must have a view, though, on what number
mate, I've studied wages movements over 40, 50 years. I'll give you a couple of numbers. Lowest wages growth under the Liberals. And never forget, Senator Matthias Cormann said that the low wages outcome was a design feature of their economy. Now, what the ultimate number is will be decided by the Independent Commission. It'll be done through partnership, negotiation, consultation with industry, the community sector, with workers' representatives. We'll get it right. But what I do know is that under this government, they spend all their time trying to give away billions and billions of dollars to the top end of town, $80 billion in corporate tax cuts, $77 billion to the top tier of income earners. They have nothing to say about wages in this country, John, and if they did, they would have in the last 6 years. Annalise.
There has been a survey about the impact of franking credit changes on Braddon in particular. Are you concerned that that could be enough to lose the seat here? And I'd also like to see what Ms Key thinks about what impact Labor's franking credit policy will have in Braddon as well.
Well, first of all, it's a reform which not everyone likes. But what good is a government in this country if it's not willing to make the big decisions? And I just want to remind you of that amazing couple we just met, Jill and Nev Barnard. When you are at stage 4 of liver cancer, your franking credit's not much use to you, is it? What you actually need is a well-funded medical system. If you need to have a hip replacement or an arthroscopy or your cataracts removed, that is actually when the rubber hits the road for a nation. So these reforms not everyone likes them, but we need to find the resources to make sure we've got the world's best healthcare system. I can't speak for all of you, but I can speak for myself and my colleagues. If I think that I can close the out-of-pockets gap for one of your family when they've got cancer, for one of your family when they've been waiting for a year in Tasmania for medical treatment, I will take that priority. I choose the health of Tasmanians over an unsustainable, unaffordable subsidy to give an income tax refund to someone who hasn't paid income tax. But it's not just that. We're cracking down on the multinationals. We want to make sure that multinationals don't treat Australia's tax system as a doormat, which they wipe their profit boots on as they walk in and out all over the world. I want us to be a nation who has the best healthcare system. Only Labor's offering to do that. Every pensioner in Australia, and trust me, there's more pensioners in Braddon than there are people getting these income tax refunds. Oh, she'll come to it in a second, Annalise. Hold your horses. Now, when it comes to pensions, because no one, you know, I won't even try and quiz you if you know how many pensioners there are in Braddon, but there's a lot. And, you know, a lot of them battle with having poor teeth and poor teeth hygiene. Why does this government not want to provide a single dollar for any pensioner in Australia to help with their dental hygiene? Justine.
Thanks, Bill. Tom that I spoke about earlier, he's not receiving franking credits, he's on a pension, and there are many people in Braddon on pensions waiting far too long for their health. I don't want to hear any more stories like Tom's. I want people to be able to get the healthcare they need when they need it. And the only people talking about franking credits in Braddon are those that will lose that payment. But I want to make sure that Tom and many other people like my mum who's on a pension can get the healthcare they need when they need it.
All right, sorry, no, hang on, we're going to share the questions.
I was going to ask Justine if she raised concerns with her Labor colleagues about the franking credit policy as it's been reported today, and whether you're worried that that will affect your vote here, given that there are older people in your electorate.
That's why we have the pensioner guarantee. That's when we, when the policy was first announced, pensioners would come to me with their concerns about that policy, and we have the pensioner guarantee, and that's what I took to my colleagues at that time.
Mr. Short.
Yeah, so let's just clear this up. I know this is a hard reform, but I tell you what, doesn't it move your hearts when you hear that pensioners in Australia can't afford to go to the dentist? Are you worried about someone who's got their sixth investment property or complains about franking credits sitting on the back deck of their yacht? Or what about the voiceless pensioners of this country? Do you know that there's 2.6 million pensioners who get no help through Medicare for their teeth? Do you know that there's 400,000 people on the Commonwealth Health Seniors Card? Some of these people will be your families, your neighbours. Did you know that when it comes to a whole range of our issues in Medicare, well, what is the argument at the end of the day? And I put to the Australian people, Jill and Neville Barnard. She got a diagnosis of cancer she thought he had it beat. On the December 22nd last year, her oncologist in tears says, it's back and it's back in your liver. They've got out-of-pocket expenses dealing with that. Are we really a nation who thinks that finding the out-of-pocket expenses for that should take second place to this lazy government's threadbare policy agenda where they want to shovel as much money as they can to big corporates, making Clive Palmer happy? Game on. This is a choice in this election. I want to lead a country where pensioners get a fair go. I want to lead a country where we actually stand up for the out-of-pocket costs of hundreds of thousands of our fellow Australians diagnosed with cancer in their families. Rosie.
Can you confirm what discussions you or your office have had with Julia Banks about running for Flinders instead of Chisholm before she decided to go with Flinders?
My goodness me, the Liberal Party must be scared of Julia Banks, aren't they? No, Rosie. You asked, I'll answer. Thank you for opening the door. Julia Banks. She backed in Malcolm Turnbull. Julia Banks was the only Liberal politician who won a seat off Labor at the last election. Then they dumped Malcolm Turnbull because he wanted to do something on climate change. Then Julia Banks went to the current Prime Minister and said, this is all public record, it's been reported in at least some newspapers, where she said, listen, there's a bullying climate here. She got no action. She's strong enough to run against a person who she thinks isn't as good a candidate for Flinders as she is. We speak to independents, but Julia Banks makes her own decisions. Please don't make the same mistake the Liberal Party men make, that somehow women in politics are just being operated on and doing the bidding of other men. Julia Banks is a strong independent. I'd like you to vote for our candidate in Flinders, but I can understand that with the division and chaos in the Liberal Party, you know, no wonder so many strong women are running as independents. Never forget, Cathy McGowan used to work for a Liberal poly, but she ran as independent. Rebecca Sharkey used to work for a Liberal poly, but she's had to run as an independent. Sally Steggall has never voted Labor, according to her in her life. She would be someone who traditionally might be more attracted to the Liberal point of view. She's had to run against Tony Abbott and Julia Banks. We heard from Julie Bishop today. You know, gee whiz, doesn't it remind us that Scott Morrison should spend more time listening to Julie Bishop, but she could only get 11 votes in this Liberal Party. Kelly O'Dwyer, no friend of Labor, reportedly said that this party, the Liberal Party, had an anti-women attitude. And here they go again. The smear squad, the hit squad of the Liberal Party, rather than deal with Julia Banks' policies, are trying to undermine her. So, you know, obviously Julia Banks has touched a chord, and she represents a strand of Liberals who this extreme right-wing Liberal Party no longer represents.
Mr. Short,
Tim.
it appears Scott Morrison did not take through his cabinet his plan to lower deposits for first home buyers, nor model them so we understand the pricing effects on the housing market. Bad enough the government might do that with a $500 million plan, but what's it say of Labor's planning that it can adopt such a quickly, rapidly thought out response in 2 hours?
Well, first, Tim. We've been talking about prioritising first homers for 6 years. We announced our reforms, our fair reforms to negative gearing, more than 3 years ago. Now, we were going to create a National Housing Supply Council so they can do the research that Mr Morrison's new body is going to do, because we've already thought about the importance of the research. In terms of the deposit scheme, it is a modest proposal. It is a restricted proposal. Hundreds of thousands of houses change hand every year. This would provide at the upper limit 10,000. So one of the reasons that we're willing to look at this proposition is because we've looked at Keystart in Western Australia, which, for your information, is a government-funded guarantee scheme, and I've met with the Keystart leadership several times. So Mr Morrison's idea is a belated recognition that he has a problem with first home buyers because he's backing the property investors. He has a problem with young people because he's got no policies for anyone under the age of 40. And he has a problem that he has no policies at all. Us, because we are a well-oiled machine who's been thinking about policy for 6 years, we can adopt an idea they have, which clearly they've thought up at the last minute. It fits within our general parameters because, you know, the Labor Party's been working on ideas for 3 years. We're not insulting the intelligence of Australians by running pointless lie campaigns and fear campaigns. You know, let's be clear. This government, the Liberals, have been lying throughout this campaign. But this week, all they've got left is lies. Now, Tanya's been travelling around Australia, and I'd like to get her perspective on the Liberal lies and fears campaign.
Well, thanks very much, Bill. And what I'd say is Bill's just described some of our housing policies. He's talked about the Housing Supply Council, the 250,000 new rental affordability homes that we would build, our homelessness policies. Catherine and Bill have been talking about our cancer package. Bill's been talking about our dental package. Right across Australia, Labor has been campaigning on our positive policies, bold, positive policies that will change this nation. We can afford to invest in health and education. We can afford the same or bigger tax cuts for 10 million working Australians. We will bring the budget back to a bigger surplus sooner because we're closing tax loopholes at the top end of town. In contrast, what have the Liberals got? I said some time ago that this is actually one of the dirtiest, probably the dirtiest campaign I've seen in my 20 years in Parliament. And I would say, without doubt, as I travel around the country, it is obvious that the Liberals have got nothing, so they've gone negative. Now, in this campaign, in recent days, we've seen racist material distributed. We've seen what looks like an arson attempt on a candidate's car. And we've seen lie after lie after lie. We've seen lies about death taxes. We've seen lies about retiree taxes. We've seen lies saying that Labor wants to take your ute, your weekend and your Tim Tams. And just, you know, in the last sort of 24 hours, we see another lie being distributed by Peter Dutton to households in Dixon saying that Labor policies will push up rent. It is unfair to frighten people in the way that Peter Dutton is trying to do. It is a lie to say that our policies will push up rents, and it is wrong of Peter Dutton to frighten people in this way, and Scott Morrison should tell him he's wrong to do it. What I would say is that in this final week, let's have a debate about the ideas. Let's debate Labor's health policy versus the Coalition's health policy. Let's debate our education policies, our plans to bring down pollution and power prices. Let's debate our vision for this nation instead of just going as low as possible as the Coalition have done.
Mr. Shorten.
Jono, sorry.
Bill Shorten, Peter Dutton has been described as very mean, one of the meanest politicians that Paul Keating has ever seen. And the nation has a chance to drive a stake through his political heart this weekend.
Oh, we've all said that about Peter Dutton.
For Mr. Keating, do you agree with his views?
Well, I actually think the meanest commentary I've seen in the election is actually the propositions that are being advanced that gay people are going to go to hell. You want to talk about me? Like, the personalities, sure, Dutton's Dutton. I think everyone knows that. But, you know, I cannot believe in this election that there is a discussion, even underway, that gay people will go to hell. I cannot believe that the Prime Minister has not immediately said that gay people will not go to hell. This country needs to really lift itself, and the political debate and coverage needs to lift itself in the next 4 days.
Do you believe that gay people should go to hell?
No, I don't believe gay people, because they're gay, will go to hell. I don't need a law to tell me that. I don't believe it. And I think if you want to be Prime Minister of Australia, you've got to be Prime Minister for all people. And I just don't believe it. And the nation's got to stop eating itself in this sort of madness of division and toxicity.
Mr. Shorten, there's footage of Liberal MP Steve Irons lashing out at volunteers, saying that Labor voted for pedophiles and those sort of things because of the Medivac bill. But on the other hand, he says Labor and union volunteers abused his wife. It's on both sides, this nastiness.
Well, I don't know what happened to his wife. No one should be abusing anyone. In terms of the policy issues, Mr Irons did vote against restoring penalty rate cuts. He did vote against that. If he finds that uncomfortable, I can't help that. He had a chance not to vote to keep the penalty rate cuts in place. No one's got the right to vilify anyone's family, and you know I know that.
Mr. Shorten. Elective surgery. You've said overnight, or Labor has said, that people are dying on the elective surgery waiting list. But can you outline how many people are actually dying? And of course, if it got to that stage, wouldn't it then turn to an emergency surgery for these people?
I'm going to get Catherine to supplement it, but in Tasmania, the waiting lists have gone up, and the number of people who are either not contactable or passing away has increased. But I'll let Catherine deal with that.
Sure. So if you look at the statistics from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, then they've been increasing every single year under the Liberals, and at the current rate of 2017-2018, there are 8,000 people, over 8,000 people in fact, who either die or are uncontactable on elective surgery waiting lists. And that's what we're seeing across the country, is that those elective surgery waiting times are blowing out. As I said, the AMA has said they're the worst in 20 years. And that's because we've had cuts to public hospitals. When Tanya was the Health Minister, we invested in reform in our public hospitals, having targets for elective surgery, improvement in hospitals, having targets for emergency department waiting times. You can't just sit back, cut millions of dollars out of our public hospitals and somehow think that everything's just going to be okay. It's not okay, and that's what's been happening, this increase in the number of people who are dying or uncontactable, who are waiting on elective surgery waiting lists, and that's the AIHW's data.
Just hang on, just get a little control here. Just one or two more questions to finish up. Sorry, someone who hasn't had a crack.
Angus Taylor says that your climate policy will negatively affect major employers on the coast. What do you say to that?
I think Angus Taylor, as usual, is talking through his hat. Northwestern Tasmania is one of the windiest locations in the world. We should be doing wind power. There are renewable jobs to be created here. How did we get to a situation that 2 decades into the 21st century, we've got a government stuck in the middle half of the last century? What is it these people have against climate change? Why is it these people can find every excuse not to do something? 13 energy policies, power prices have been going up. Labor says that climate change is real. Labor says we will act on climate change. I mean, I noticed that there's been 10 or a dozen protesters on a bridge in Sydney, the Harbour Bridge, of course. I don't approve of that. I understand people protesting, but I don't want other people, if it's illegal, don't approve of that. I don't want other people thinking they can imitate that behaviour because it's unsafe. And I feel for the the emergency officials who've got to put themselves in line to get these people down. But what I say to millions of Australians who are not contemplating scaling the Harbour Bridge but are concerned about climate change, you can make a really effective protest on Saturday. You can vote Labor for real action on climate change. Very last question. Sorry, very last.
The ag sector's calling out for a dedicated agricultural visa. Will the Labor Party support a dedicated agricultural visa?
We're open to making sure that our skills visa mix includes meeting legitimate labour shortages. I accept that in parts of agriculture there are legitimate labour shortages. So that should give encouragement to the ag sector. But let's talk about the ag sector more generally. We have a shortage in workforce there. So what we need to do is we need our TAFE sector to be training more people. So we're bridging some of that gaps. In addition, the dairy industry, which is so very important in Australia, only Labor is saying that we need to work towards a minimum price at the farm gate. In Tasmania, we've led the debate about irrigation services, just as we are in central Queensland with developing Rookwood Weir. So Labor's very pro-developing our agricultural sector. We see it as being a very strong export industry. We're certainly open to that. I did say last question, so...
Just one more.
Sorry, just a local, sorry.
Thank you. So obviously we've seen that the recent polling shows the race is as tight as ever, especially in Bass. How confident are you can at least retain the seats you've got in Tasmania?
Well, that's a good note to end it on, and thank you very much. Labor's got the best candidates, so that's a tick. Labor's got a set of policies for Tasmania. This is something you ain't going to see from the Liberals. It's a fair go plan for Tasmania. And it lists all of the things we're going to do, not the least of which is in healthcare. You know, from the hospital, Launceston General, right through to TasReach, right through to making sure that we get access to proper services, right through to a special allocated fund for a blitz on waiting lists in Tasmania. When you look at that, add on to our infrastructure proposals, our tourism proposals, our agricultural proposals, our job proposals in the maritime precinct, and of course us wanting to see Tasmania be the battery of the nation and make sure that we get proper investment in Tasmania, making sure that when we build this infrastructure that we give priority to Tasmanians for the jobs. We want to get the wages moving for Tasmanians. We want to make sure that those great people that all of us were privileged to see upstairs get help with their out-of-pocket costs. And of course, we want to make sure that future generations of Tasmanians get to enjoy the same environment we do by stopping the chaos in Canberra, voting for real change, voting for real action on climate change. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.